If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and it's been a while since I've done a setup like this, just the more sort of casual conversational kind of video. But I figured it worked well for Primal, so I may as well do it for Godzilla Singular Point, which has just debuted on Netflix. And before any of you ask, I'm watching it dubbed first, and I have a good reason. I know that there's been a bit of a debate revived in the anime community recently about the whole dub versus sub idea, mostly fueled by how dubs as of late have been making controversial changes to the dialogue. Not all of them really that reflect the original intent of the story. Personally, I am neither a dub nor sub elitist. I feel like I should be able to watch it in either language and still get the point. And as long as the dub doesn't make any unnecessary changes or changes that completely destroy the intent of the original dialogue, then it's okay to watch that. Plus, my main reason for watching the dub is that I want to pay attention to the visuals, and I don't want to be distracted by having to read subtitles, especially not if there are multiple things to read at once. Like the opening couple of minutes of couple of seconds for this first episode is a bunch of things being said all at once. That would have been a jumble. I would have had to keep going back and pausing, but instead I was just able to listen to it, pick up on what they actually wanted me to hear and understand and keep in mind for later, and then I could move on with the rest of the episode without having to stop or rewind or anything. So that's the reason I'm watching the dub going forward, and it also allows me to say something which I know for a fact no one has said before, because no one has actually watched the dub at this point and said anything about it. The dub is okay, but there's one choice with the character so far that I think was probably a mistake. Now, the characters are mostly speaking with neutral American accents, which is to say practically no accent at all. Sort of like what I have, or at least what I presume I have. It's understood that they're all supposed to be speaking Japanese, but so as not to sound like it's from a particular region of America, they go with something that is considered typically American. Except for one character, so far anyway. There is one character who has a very mild Japanese accent, just a little hint of one to let you know he is Japanese. And this accent is given to the most stereotypically Japanese-appearing character in the whole cast. You know, the big guy with the bald head, the squinty eyes, and the little mustache. Now, that's how he was originally designed by the Japanese design team, so that's not necessarily racist. I just find it weird that he's the only one with an accent. I don't think there was any ill intent on the dub company's part. I just think maybe they didn't really think it through. He should probably have just had the same kind of voice as the other characters. But that's the only thing I can say about the dub so far that's a little off. I wouldn't have personally done that myself, unless the characters were all meant to be American and he was the Japanese guy speaking English. Then you could say, yes, give him an accent to let them know that he is not from the same country as these other guys. But since he is, it makes no sense for him to have that accent. Otherwise, the dub is good. But that's to be expected these days. We are far removed from the 80s and 90s where anime dubs were basically people who imported these things on their own dime and then asked their friends if they wanted to do some voice acting, despite not having any experience. These days you can actually get actors to do it, so it's no surprise the dub is good. I don't know if it's as good as the original yet, but you can listen to it and not want to jam an ice pick into your eardrums. Now, as for the content of the first episode, it is the first episode of an anime, and I have seen enough anime to know what a first episode can look like. Sometimes a first episode tells you everything you need to know, but other times, especially if it's really trying for long-form storytelling, it does this thing that I would call a cryptic exposition dump, where it's providing a lot of the building blocks, it's setting the foundation, it's giving you stuff to think about that will be relevant at some point, but right now it just sounds random and weird and you don't know what the context fully is. That's what Godzilla Singular Point does, and I know for a fact that from this kind of episode, you cannot really make a full judgment of what to expect. Judging it on its own merits, as far as those cryptic exposition dump episodes go, it's not necessarily as enigmatic as others I've seen. Like, for example, the first episode of Code Geass: Lelouch of the Rebellion. That's the sort of thing that just throws you headlong into this alternate history with characters who have a very, very long history and a very complicated history, but none of that is actually revealed to you until the second episode. Or like with the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, technically that first episode spoils a lot of different things, but it's completely removed from the context of the rest of the story, so there's no way you can possibly know what's going on, and the episode feels random. It's brilliant, but still feels random when you first watch it. This, you can tell that they're at least trying to ease you into it a little. Not completely, of course. You're still meant to accept that they are able to make a giant robot, clunky looking as it is, or that there's this secret facility with a giant Godzilla skeleton down in the basement, but you're still not as out of your element, if you will, as you might be with another sort of anime series. So it's gently easing you in, or at least as gently as it can manage, while still kind of giving you a lot to process in a way. But then again, what is there to process? A lot of stuff is being said. We meet our main characters, particularly Yun and Mei. Yun appears to be a sort of Sherlock Holmes kind of character, or at least how Sherlock Holmes is more frequently interpreted these days, as being incredibly brilliant, able to deduce a lot of things, and yet very socially inept. And Mei, she also is clearly meant to be brilliant, but more, I don't want to say slovenly, but the fact that she mostly wears sweat clothes and t-shirts and doesn't seem to manage her hair all that much clearly shows that she's more concerned about what she researches and what she's interested in than anything else. And we can't really say too much about them at this point, because we're only learning the basics of them. There are other things here and there that we can say do hint at them being more complex characters. Yun, for example, is shown eating this gigantic dessert in one of the scenes, which, you know, the guy who eats sweets is not an uncommon sight in anime. But it still gives more insight into him and makes him feel like more than just the guy who does deductive reasoning and is like Sherlock but with pale platinum hair. And also the fact that he rushes to save that one kid when Rodan shows up at the end, or at least try to save him. Obviously it ends before things really heat up. But that act alone tells us that he is a brave individual. So we know that there's more to him, or at least I hope there's more to him. We just have yet to see it. And as for Mei, we learned that she once had a pet dog, which she names the AI that she downloads onto her computer after. That was a jumbled way of saying that, I realize, but I hope you understand what I meant. Anyway, that's a little insight into her character. It tells us she has a history. She once cared for an animal. That's a good way to get someone to endear themselves to the audience. We also know that she's studying unconventional science, apparently looking for creatures that mainstream science would say don't exist. They don't say outright that it's cryptozoology. In fact, I know cryptozoologists who would hear what she's looking for and say, man, that's crazy. But she's clearly got this idea that she's not a conventional thinker. And again, that makes an interesting setup. Where that goes, I mean, I can put a few guesses out there because we're dealing with a series where kaiju show up, but the way she phrases it in her last scene in this episode is interesting. She says, in order to know what's there, we need to know what isn't there, or words to that effect, which is a very unusual way of putting it. Like, I'm not even sure what the term for that would be. Is she trying to prove that these things exist, or is she trying to disprove them? Whatever the case, it's an interesting way of putting it. I don't know necessarily at this point if the original dialogue is a little different, because again, I'm watching this brand new, I'm watching it dubbed first to make sure I get all the visual details. I'm assuming that's as accurate a translation as they could get, though. Since I keep saying I'm watching this series dubbed so I can get a good idea of the visuals, how are those visuals? The visuals are really good. Just in terms of art style, it feels more alive, more vibrant than the anime Polygon trilogy did. It's not washed out in gray, it's not 3D, and I actually think having it be 2D rather than 3D, for the humans at least, makes a big difference. One of the things that kind of got me about the Polygon trilogy was that the characters were three-dimensional, because they were rendered in that kind of animation, but they still moved like they were 2D characters, and that does not look natural, because the majority of anime made in Japan, of course, that has a lower frame rate than animation made in America. So the characters don't move as smoothly. They have more of a jerky motion for all intents and purposes. That's the best I can describe it. It's almost like comparing stop motion animation to the way a real person like me would move. So applying that to 3D, it doesn't really look that good. But it looks natural in 2D. Maybe I'm just used to it because I've seen a lot of 2D anime, but it looks better here. And actually, in terms of 2D anime, it's on the higher end. The movement is just a little bit smoother, a little bit crisper than most TV anime. I'm not saying it's like so fluid you'd think it was rotoscoped, but it is better than it usually would be expected of this kind of show. And as for the monsters, well, we only get a brief glimpse of Rodan at the end, and Rodan, of course, is representative of all the monsters in that he is done in 3 dimensions. And he moves very smoothly, very different from the 2D characters, and yet it doesn't clash. It's not like he looks like he's from a completely different series, somehow was stuck in there, but he doesn't fit into that world and therefore sticks out like a sore thumb. Rodan, despite being in a completely different style and a completely different dimension than the other characters, still looks like he belongs in that setting. And that alone is very impressive. To have that sort of visual cohesion when you're doing that sort of thing, yeah, I have no complaints with the animation or the visuals at this point. So the first episode certainly hasn't driven me away. I don't really know what else to say at this point, though, because like I said, this is the setup. This is laying the groundwork for all of the crazy stuff that's going to come. And I assume, based on random screen grabs I've seen over the past few weeks, that it will be very crazy. But at this point, all I can say is the first episode did its job. Hopefully, the second episode is where we solidify whether or not this show is going to be good or bad. And that usually is the pattern. When you have a first episode of an anime that does that sort of thing with the enigmatic exposition dump. The second episode usually says, okay, now we can clear things up for you and give you a bit more of an idea of what's going on. So hopefully that's what happens. Maybe it'll take the next 2 episodes, but for now, the first episode is what it is. And the first episode certainly isn't bad. So, guess it's time to move on to the next episode and see how that plays out. And I'll be back for another video once that's done. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.